everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the third installment of the buyer's guide for the 108. Sorry it's spaced out a bit, there's been a lot going on, various things, but anyway, so we finally got around to shooting this video. We're going to talk about the subframe, the drive shaft, rear axle, that kind of things, and then also the engine of both my 108s. This is obviously from the 6.3 with the air suspension. We're not really going to talk about that per se. This is just solely the 108 cars, and that is a 68 280 SE 108 and then the 280 SE 4.5 V8. So I've got the 68 up on jack stands outside so we can have a little bit more of a detailed look about the subframe and various components to look out for, and you know, help you maybe negotiate about a deal on a car that you might have your eye on or walk away from, depending on your capabilities, your the rest of the car, you know, bodywork, paint, rust, all that stuff. Breaking it up to 3 elements so you can kind of get your head around it. So let's pop outside and take a look at the 68 and we'll go into more detail. So down here on the driver's side, took the wheel off and jacked the car up so you can have a good look here. First things first, you want to check this subframe mount up here. It's just on the top of these towers. If you can get the car jacked up, that would be ideal, and so get yourself a flashlight and check for any cracking and obvious signs of wear and damage on my 4.5 that I did some time ago, earlier this year actually, was really in bad shape and it was separating and everything like that. So this is a fairly kind of fairly advanced job. You know, if you're willing and keen, you can do it yourself, but it's certainly a cost to take into consideration, you know, because this subframe does have to be dropped somewhat to be able to insert the subframe mount and then all bolted up again. Obviously check that there's original shocks in here. There should be ideally the Bilstein shocks. Is the standard, you know, so you might want to look for those. And also you can peek through to see if you can see the engine mount down here. Check for that it's if you haven't got anything to compare it to, it's a little difficult to notice it, but if it's obviously crushed down. And also you could check for the parts of the engine and transmission getting very close to structures of the car that will indicate that it's essentially lowered. At the same time, also, if you can get under and check the rear transmission mount, it's a lot easier to change those out than it is to do the engine mounts. So, and you also, you really want to use, if you are changing engine mounts, use the proper Mercedes engine mounts. They last so much longer than the third-party ones that are available. Now, as far as other things in here, let me now obviously you've got these wishbones here, the upper wishbone and then the lower control arm essentially, and then you've got a pivot pin. Now this is a pivot pin. This is the upper pivot pin, and you've got, this is the hole where the Zerk fitting is to do the lubrication. And essentially, if you see what happens, you see when they're lubricated, the grease will fill up in here in this chamber and then essentially lubricate this. Okay, so it's a vital thing that is done to scheduled maintenance, and the way you can normally see that it's been done regularly is that there might be fresh grease around the nipples. A lot of the times these get ignored, but it's a fairly expensive job to replace the seals on these, and also these pins themselves if they become dry and worn. Let me show you on the lower one. This is a lower pin. Okay, this is the one that mounts underneath the subframe, and what you want to check are these seals. Okay, they're on all corners of these control pins, these control arm pins. Now if these are torn up or missing completely, that exposes this thread to the weather and moisture and the grease falling out, crap and grit getting into this thread and excessively wearing it. And to replace these extraordinarily cheap seals, it's quite a job, because the whole all of the control arms need to come out, and obviously that means dealing with the spring on a sprung car like this. So really check, and what I do, I reach my finger in there, some gloves and stuff, and just you can feel for these rubber seals. So that's something that's very important. So look for any lubrication evidence that they've been lubricated, and also if it's on a vehicle history, that's ideal, or if the owner themselves has been diligent enough to do these grease points. Now, moving on from the grease points, if they've done proper maintenance, you've got several grease points up the front here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've 4 for the control arms. Then you have 3 on the, I'll show you now, the kingpin. Now the kingpin rests here, obviously. Let me move there. You've got an upper zerk fitting here, and you've got a zerk fitting midway on the shaft, and then you've got one all the way down the bottom underneath here on this trunnion here. Now again, those are required grease intervals. Off the top of my head, I think it's every 3,000 miles. I may be wrong on that, but I do mine generally each time I do my oil changes. So that's something that you want to take into consideration. If you can detect any rocking on the kingpin or some sloppiness here, then it's a kingpin job, and again that means it requires the spring to come out, and it's quite an involved and expensive job. Not so bad if you're doing it yourself. I did do a video about the subframe rebuild on the 4.5 that takes into all of the procedures that you need to do to replace that. Now taking it as a whole, you've got the 4, you've got 3, you've got 14 zerk fittings to lubricate on the front end of one of these 108s. So that's something that should be done diligently to preserve the front subframe and make sure you don't have any issues. I did actually have a lower control arm break on me when I purchased the car some years ago because of that exact thing. They'd neglected the lubrication, and essentially this had seized up and put so much force on, this moved, and then the control arm snapped, and that you wouldn't want happening on at high speed on the freeway or something. So as I say, you've got flexible brake lines. Check to see if they've been replaced. These again are fairly inexpensive and a pretty easy job to take care of. And then let's think, obviously check rotors. There's scoring or a heavy outside lip. This has got a little bit of a lip on this. These rotors are probably due for a change. That'll give you an idea to, you can, at this point you can check for brake pad wear. Again, a very simple job to change those out. As far as cost on evaluating something like this, difficult for me to estimate what a shop would cost, would charge for something like this, but all of the parts, I'm guessing if you went, obviously Mercedes, all Mercedes parts, I'm thinking you probably wouldn't get much change out of $1,000, $1,200 for all the various little bushings and bits and bobs that you're going to need. Quite a bit more if you ended up having to replace these guys, because these are not cheap. I had a few really good old used ones that I was able to use on the 4.5 because I did have some damage on one of the threads on there, but these from Mercedes run around 400 a piece, and there's 4 of these up front, so you can see how it can get into some money. So check those seals, and also it can be a negotiating tool if you end up having to consider removing a subframe. Now as far as cost, as I say, probably $1,000, $1,200 in parts. That's kind of a guess on my part, but once this is taken out, rebuilt, put back in, I wouldn't mind betting you wouldn't see much change out of $4,000, something like that, to redo a subframe on the 108. But correct me if I'm wrong on that, guys. And after the subframe, obviously you've got your regular stuff, you know, all your tie rods, your steering dampener. All those are relatively inexpensive if you do need to go in and change those out. You'll see underneath there, I think you can see that in the background there, the handbrake cable. That is a pretty self-explanatory, and make sure that it's tracking correctly. I have seen the eyelet on the transmission that is a guide for that cable missing, and then this cable tracking wrong right across the underside of the transmission pan and kind of making a wear mark. That's not good. When you're under there, you want to check for transmission leaks. You're going to see a little bit of weeping here and there, but nothing too excessive. I'm not going to get too much into the transmissions. I've never had any problems with these transmissions on the 6-cylinder or the 4.5. Obviously, the obvious thing is to check the cleanliness of the transmission fluid and that it's not got a burnt smell when you check it in the engine bay. And the shifts are smooth. On the 4.5 they're very smooth, and they should be very smooth. These 6s, this type of transmission that came in these 108s, the 6 cylinders, they tended to be a really firm shift, and that can be adjusted with the modulator that's on the other side of the car somewhat, but then not like a modern transmission, a smooth shifting modern transmission. They, as I say, they do tend to be a little firm, and that can be mitigated by adjustments on the modulator and also the linkages. On the 6-cylinder, the fuel filter, there's a very large fuel filter just inside here at the front of the, well, kind of on the front top control arm. You'll see it. It's a big can there, looks very similar to the oil filter. It's a nice big fuel filter. You want to make sure that if you've got the evidence from the owner that they've changed the fuel filter. If not, that's something you would want to do to make sure that's nice and clean, along with the strainer in the fuel tank. The oil filter is situated on this same side towards the back here. The front end on this 1968 108 is pretty much identical to the 4.5, except the 4.5 has a much heavier spring on the front to cope with the extra weight of the engine, but they're pretty much identical. So that's why I'm just showing you on this car. So underneath here, the front, this is the oil cooler drain plug here. You want to check, see if that has been had, you know, during the oil changes. This should be drained as well. And normally you can check. You see there's a new crush washer in there because I've just done an oil change recently on this car. These are the transmission cooler lines. Check that they're routed properly and they're not all worn and chafed. And just, you know, your general normal checking for oil leaks and stuff like that. You're going to see a little bit here and there, but nothing too excessive. There is the engine shock for the 6-cylinder model. As I say, it's got 2 on the 4.5. That's a very easy thing to change out, so not a big deal if that needs changing. Also, obviously check radiator, make sure you haven't got any leaks there or evidence of leaking. Luckily these radiators are able to be recored and essentially repaired, which is kind of nice. As you can see where the handbrake cable is, and there's the eyelet around that area. Okay, now I've seen it where those are missing, and then this whole cable gets poing straight over and starts rubbing against the transmission oil pan there. So check for that. That's something that I've seen on a few of these, when that eyelet is missing or it's not been put back after some work, and so check for that. Here is the lower Zerk fitting on the kingpin here. As I say, you've got one at the bottom, one midway and one at the top. It's obviously the M130 6-cylinder. I'm going to show you on the V8 version a few little details that do coincide with this engine as well, but what I would recommend, so I don't make this video sort of crazy length, if you could have at least a compression test done, and ideally a leak down test, which will tell you a lot more about the condition of the engine, not just percentage wise as far as compressions between each cylinder, but it could give you a really strong indicator and isolate any problems that you might have. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about operations of engines, because all that, you know, has been covered by many videos that you can find, but I would recommend a leak down test. And as far as visual, I mean, this is a as I say, I use this car quite a bit. So this is just like a little survivor car. You know, I try to keep it up and do all my regular maintenance. You know, it's nice to you see proper Mercedes hoses, the clamps, things like that. Checking obviously for any severe leaks around the, say, the rocker cover. Also, you might want to talk to the owner that he's done regular valve adjustments. Probably not a lot of people keep up with that kind of thing, but that should be done every around 12,000 miles. Also on this, if you can check the batteries on this side and on the other side on the V8, if you can check underneath, we talked about that in the bodywork video, but checking for signs of rust and leaf accumulation in these areas, especially below the brake booster. Check your fluids, obviously the oil, the transmission fluid, the brake fluid, and also the steering pump fluid, which is in here. Okay, and there is a filter at the bottom of this canister that should be changed out. Now this is again something that gets ignored. Check the cleanliness of the fluid in there to make sure that that's nice and clean. You've got your injection pump down there, and that's another really good reason to make sure the filters are changed to protect that pump, because they don't grow on trees and they're not particularly cheap to be gone through. I do have recommendations of someone that did my 6.3 if you want to put a comment if you need that information. I've never had any problems with this one whatsoever. When I bought this car, it was lucky enough to have had that pump gone through, which was nice. And this is a fairly low mileage car for the year, and I think it would just sat too long. And the worst thing you can do with these old cars, any old car really, is to just let them sit. You know, you don't want these love to be driven, these cars. So this car has been so reliable, as has the 4.5, because I drive them a lot. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is how the engine bay presents itself. You know, is there any weird wiring or, you know, extras that are quite obviously not meant to be there? Things of that nature might want to alert you. Check the cleanliness of the coolant and the oil. Obviously, check for any mayonnaise and that, evidence of blown head gasket and that nature. But I really highly recommend doing a lig down test on any car you're buying, really. So also with both cars, check the belt condition. Again, fairly lightweight maintenance item, but something to give you an indicator of how well the car's been maintained over the years. Let's switch over to the 4.5 engine bay, and a lot of the things I'll tell you about that do apply to this, but more so on the 4.5. Rear on the 4.5, same thing applies. Checking radiator cap, you know, in there, checking for any evidence of contamination, cross contamination with oil. Check your hose condition, plug leads, you know, are they the correct ones, and that they haven't got any chafing or damage there. Those are all pretty straightforward things. And again, leak down test is the ideal thing to really give you an idea of internal engine condition. Steering pump reservoir is located in a similar position, a little higher up here. Subframe mounts are just there, that's where they bolt on, as I showed you earlier, on the inside of the car. Some of the cars have a cover plate over the top of that. That's more like the Pagoda has one down in the well, and these did come sometimes with a plastic cover just to stop debris getting in there. Moving up, see there's some slight surface rust on this one due to brake fluid dripping and peeling the paint. That's another job to be done in the future. And obviously your brake fluids to check the cleanliness of that. The Achilles heel on these, as I'm sure you are aware, is the timing chain. Chain and tensioner condition is vital. If this breaks, then sayonara to the engine. And because this is the V8, the chain is that much longer than the 6, so it's especially vital to check that on the V8. And if you've got service records to prove that the chain has been done, along with the tensioner, the guides, and also the cam oiler clips on these two overhead cams on the cam. Let me get something and I'll show you. along with the chain, because it is such a long chain, I mean, to give you an idea, this is the 4.5 V8 on my 6.3 engine that I'm rebuilding. The chain is 7 feet long, and you can imagine each of the links just stretching ever so tiny amount would add up over the length of a 7-foot chain. This one is probably 6.5 feet, I would imagine, just over 6 feet long. So it's vital to know the condition of the chain, the cam gears, the guides, the tensioner, and also one that gets missed, as I say, are the oiler tubes that you can actually see if you take the cap off, the oiler tube inside here, and they're supported on the cam towers by a series of clips that hold the tube. Now what happens, obviously this is plastic, right, and over the heat cycles these have been known to break or come adrift, and then the cam oiler tube falls down. The cams obviously are not getting oil, and then you've got an expensive repair on your hands. So this is definitely something to check. If you cannot confirm that the car has had any of this work done, if you buy the car, that's the priority #1 job, is to do a valve guide adjustment, cam oiler clip check your chain and your tensioner, and the guides. Now the guides on this car, thankfully, are steel guides, steel back guides with a wear material on it. Now they replaced those in later years with plastic guides. That's all you can buy now, and so those guides are available from Mercedes and should ideally be changed. Not the lower ones, you're probably not going to get to those, but the upper ones definitely are an important one, and along with the, as I say, the chain tensioner. The ideal way to check for chain stretch, there are there's some marks on the cams on each of the cam towers, and obviously the harmonic balancer, and on the notched area of the distributor. And once these cams are lined up, okay, you can, once they're lined up, you can read on the harmonic balancer how many degrees of stretch you have, and I think around 3 to 4 is acceptable. Much further above that you're running into the risky area. When I got this car, in actual fact, when I took the cam cover top off to do the adjustment, I saw evidence of the chain had been slapping against the side of the cylinder head and wore grooves in it. So they were able to change the chain out before there was a disaster. What you will, if the car starts out from cold and there is a noise coming from this area, that will indicate that the chain tensioner is possibly not pumping up and you need to replace the chain tensioner. If it persists, then you've got an issue. You don't want to be driving the car in that condition. So that's one job you really want to make sure that that's done. And again, leak down test ideally would be the best way to go to check the internal condition of the engine. And this is a beautiful engine. This I've had now for 10 years, this car, and it drives beautiful, got good power, not great on gas, I've got to admit that, but wonderful engine, the 4.5 in the 108 shell. More unique to the 4.5 obviously because you've got the electronic fuel injection and you've got the series of injectors. You'll have to take the air cleaner off to do a thorough inspection, which is very easy. 10mm nut here, and then just lift it straight up. And then on the bottoms of the injectors, on the injector rail, you'll see short fuel lines about this length. Those again is something you want to set yourself to change those out, and check that the clamps are good and they're the correct fuel injection clamps. Let me zoom in and I'll show you. As far as the injectors and also the clamps, these are the clamps. These are proper fuel injection clamps here with the smooth band. They're not the serrated type that can cut into the hoses. The fuel injection, the short pieces, all along these rails here. Okay, so you want to check the condition of that fuel line there on both sides, and any of the fuel lines really, because leaking fuel on the M117, the 4.5, has caused car fires in the past. So that's another maintenance job you want to do when you buy the car, and I do have a video on that procedure. So you know, it's kind of fiddly, but it's something you can do at home, making sure obviously to use the correct fuel injection, high pressure fuel injection hose. Those of you with sharp eyes will know that this is not stock battery hold down. I've had that in there for years, and I've been meaning to source the proper clamp at the bottom, and it's just another job that I've got to get to, so excuse that. But this has been a wonderful car, as reliable as sin, and a great engine in the 108. Also, another thing to check is the air condition work. These are obviously running on R12 originally, and I have not actually got the air conditioner running. The compressor works and everything, but I've never really gotten around to draining the system and changing it over to R134. It is a job that I'm going to do in the future, but it's a very low priority job for me. But if that's important to you, you want to check the operation of that and take that into consideration for the cost. Another thing, take the cap off here. You're only going to be able to see I think 1 or 2 lobes, cam lobes, but that will give you a little indicator of condition of the cam. Obviously, to do a thorough check, those covers are going to have to come off, and that is something that you know, is not a 5-minute job, but just checking inside there will give you some indicator. If you see a bunch of rust or scoring, for instance, on that cam there, then obviously be very cautious of going forward on that, because I mean, these cams can be had, but they're not cheap, and obviously not cheap to replace. Another thing slightly different on the 4.5, it does come with the soundproofing. I just replaced this, as you know. I repaired the whole front of this car. I put new sound deadening on the underside. You're probably going to see cars with all that kind of falling off. Something to take in consideration. This wasn't on the 6 cylinders. This was only on the 4.5. I do believe on the 3.5. It was not on the 6.3 or the 280s. So you want to check the condition there. If it's missing, it's not an horrendous job, but it's a fiddly job. Ideally the hood will come off. It's a lot easier to do that, but it can be done in situ. There are a few videos out of people doing a nice job of that, so that's another consideration. Now, as far as from the engine back, obviously, as I've said, checking for transmission leaks, any weeping. You're going to see a little bit, but excessive amounts, you want to be on the you know, guard about that sort of thing. Then the drive shaft, we've got a 2-part axle, and this is midway in the car. You'll see this carrier, and this is the bearing, and also there's a rubber mount donut in here. If you can see that guy, they dry up and become you know, degraded over the years, and can cause vibration and also rumbling from the center bearing. It's not an overly difficult job to access this area, but you do have to split the axle, and also obviously mark the axle before you do that to replace the bearing, because if you don't, then these two pieces are balanced together and you'll get vibration if they don't go back the way they're meant to be from the factory. It's not like the American design and other manufacturers where they have a circlip. These are pressed in here, so that would have to be done at a specialized shop to replace the UV joints. I had a drive shaft with new UV joints fitted to the 280 my 68 up in Portland, I believe it was, and it ran around $600, and they new UV joints and balanced the shaft and sent it back to me for $600. So not the end of the world. Moving back to the rear differential, check the obvious for leaks and things like that, and service history on the differential, as it had its proper oil change intervals on the diff. I think they're running around, I think 60,000, but I might be wrong on that. Again, off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly. And as I say, checking for leaks and things. Also, there is the boot. Let me get one for you. On the 4.5, the gear ratios are essentially, off the top of my head, I think 3.45 ratio, something. I may be wrong on that. And so it's a long-legged car. You know, it doesn't rev as high. That's why it's very popular for people to change the differentials from the 4.5 to the 280 SE, the 6-cylinder. Because trust me, these are a little revvy. I think this is a 4.06 in this, or a high 389, something like that. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you. That consequently translates to a higher revving engine at around 65, 70. You know, it's getting up there. I've gotten very used to it now over the years, but I highly recommend, if you're looking at the 6, is to test drive it and run it up to 65, 70 and see if you're okay with that. I'm fine with it. I love it personally, because it feels peppy, it feels lively. It's not going to be like a modern silent car at all. The 4.5 is a much quieter car, a lot long-legged car. Obviously the gas mileage suffers somewhat, but it's it's a different animal, a different driving animal, the 4.5 to the 6. So if you're on the fence as far as which one to pick, that might be a deciding factor of the ratios of the gears. So anyway, I'll come back to that towards the end of the video. But on the 4.5, it came with a hydropneumatic compensator, which is you'll see it mounted crosswise under, just above the axle. It's like a tubular shock, encased shock, and what that does, that compensates. So if you put some passengers in the back of the car, it compensates and it keeps the car level. A lot of the times those fail over the years, and you'll see, if you see the car sinking at the back, it's because the compensator has gone out. A lot of times people replace them with the spring from the 6-cylinder models, the basic models, and that's what I did on the 4.5, and to be perfectly honest with you, it's fine. I know the hydropneumatic compensator is really nice, but once I fitted that spring, I never really looked back, to be honest with you. Just quickly brought you into the shop here to show you, this is the hydropneumatic compensator that came off the 4.5, and it sits on top on the suspension, bolts on here, and bolts on the axle with this guy, and that's the thing that compensates. And this is just shot, this is no longer working, and if you wanted to get one working, as I say, there's around $1,000 to $1,500 to have them rebuilt. I've never bothered. This has been off the car now for getting on 11 years, and I've just replaced this unit with a spring from the other more basic model, and it's been fine. But when these are working, they're supposed to be really nice. I had an old SEL 4.5 that had one, and it rode wonderful. So anyway, so that's something to consider. Also above that, you're going to see, or off to the side, you're going to see this boot, and this is for the swing axle, and so has a clamp round here on both sections, and this is designed to open and close like this, right, you know, with the movement of the axle. Get some gloves on and run your fingers around here, check for any tears on this boot, because if this is torn, then it's quite a big job to replace this. That would mean dropping of the axle, separating of the two pieces, and putting this back in there, and that's quite a big job. So check the condition of this boot. There are aftermarket versions where this boot has got a split in the top here, and there's a special tool to be able to crimp it back. I haven't had any experience of those. I suppose they're a good way of getting you out of trouble for a period of time until you save your pennies to repair the rear axle yourself or get it done. So there are options, but ideally you want a full boot like this, and as I say, check for splits and weeping and stuff of that nature. Some of the other obvious stuff is exhaust and that kind of plumbing stuff, but that's like any other car. These I just wanted to be more specific to the 108 for people that want to buy them. As you're looking underneath the car, checking the condition of you know, fuel lines, return lines, brake lines, all that sort of stuff, you know, that they're not crimped or bent or been messed around with, and both these cars are fine with that, and I've never really had any issue with that, except the 6.3, which has basically every issue under the sun. But also the flex discs, flex disc up by the transmission where the shaft connects. Check the condition of that. This one went out about a year ago. I found this vibration. I pulled this car in and the flex disc was sort of starting to shred itself and causing the whole drive shaft to shake, and you could really feel it through the car. So fairly straightforward job to replace one of those, getting underneath, getting it up on jacks and bolt in, bolt off basically. So as far as the rear, again, going back on checking the inside of the wheel there, checking for any weeping, possible axle seals, and that's another job that you can run into a little bit of money, especially if it's leaked out and the bearings need changing. These are all jobs that I don't know whether I've done a video on that, but will in the future. But another area you want to check, again, flexible brake hoses at the backs too, and also taking the rear wheels off and checking the rotor condition and the pads. These have a shoe type style thing in a hub for the handbrake. Not something you can really check, but check that the handbrake does hold the car. I did actually, when I bought my 4.5, when I finally got it fired up, because it had sat for many years before I got it running from the person I bought it from. I went to put it into reverse and it stopped, it jammed. Okay, and I thought, oh man, so I broke down one of the rotors on the back, pulled it off, and one of the retaining springs from the shoes, the brake shoes, had broken, and what was happening, the shoe had come adrift and was binding. So it's a very simple fix. That's the beauty of these cars. The mechanical sides are very straightforward for most good avid DIYers to fix and take care of yourself. Well, I hope you enjoyed these videos, these buyer's guide videos. In this final one, I've gone through the subframe, the engines and the drive shaft and the rear axle. If I've missed anything, please put in the comments below and we can maybe start a conversation, and if I feel the need, maybe shoot a kind of a top-up video of different elements I may have missed. So hopefully you get something out of it and it gives you a good idea of things to look for, the more important things when you're buying one of these cars, and may help you in the negotiation, get a better price so you can put more money towards parts and repairs and things like that, which you're going to have to do. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. I wanted to talk a little bit about the choice. I've had both these cars. I literally bought both these cars at the same weekend. We went up to get the 68 in Northern California. It's over 11 years ago now. And at the same weekend I was negotiating a deal on the 4.5. We picked the 68 up, drove it back, and it turns out I'd won the auction on Bring a Trailer 11 years ago on the 4.5, and that was when it really was Bring a Trailer, and it was trailered from Colorado. So enough said about that. But after getting them both roadworthy, especially the 4.5, it had sat for a long period of time, I've had a long time to kind of compare the two cars, even though they visually are, almost identical, except for a few elements, indicators and things of that nature, headrests, and they got completely different personalities, both cars. And what I recommend is that if you're unsure, if you're on the fence and you've never driven one before, to try and drive one, each of the models, to see what suits you best. Now, I've been trying to think of what sums up them as far as their personalities. The six-cylinder, the one that I try to only use in fair weather days, if I get caught out in the rain, it's not the end of the world, but I do drive it as much as I possibly can in the good weather days, mainly spring through summer and into the fall, and then in the winter it gets laid up, and then I like to spend that time fixing things that I need attention. That car has a very, as I've mentioned, the gear ratios makes it rev a little higher. So at 65-70 mile an hour, it's revving quite high. I've got used to it, but that's something you might want to take in consideration. Possibly you're looking at a car that's had the conversion with the 4.5 rear end that makes it a little bit more comfortable. I've gotten used to it over the years, and I kind of find it a little endearing, really, to get out on the highway and give it a good, rev it right up, 3,500 revs, and really feel like you're driving it around the country roads. It's a ton of fun. It's a lot of fun. But to be honest with you, I think that people riding in the car with you that are used to modern vehicles may find it a little bit too revvy and a little too noisy, and that's just an honest assessment of it. But if you're like me, a lot of the time people don't ride in my cars. You know, the wife will grudgingly say, okay, we'll take your car. I don't know why particularly. I drive them myself all the time, daily drivers. And so, like I say, best advice is to drive both of them. And so the personality of the 6-cylinder is revvy. It's kind of a happy little car. It's much more basic compared to the 4.5. It's spirited, put it that way. Now the 4.5 is much more long-legged car. It's fine on the freeway all day long at 80, 90 mile an hour. And it's just got long-legged, the gear ratios, 3-speed transmission, the torque of the 4.5, it's a different animal. It feels heavier. It feels like a heavier car on the road. And I don't think the weights, obviously it's heavier with the heavier engine, but I don't think it's a ton more. And as far as personality, like I say, it's more like driving a living room around, really. A small one compared to the American cars. But as far as the personality of that, this is the sort of car, if you were picking someone up at the airport and you were to choose one, you'd go in the 4.5. It's just more comfortable. It's a more comfortable driving experience on the freeway. Overtaking maneuvers, things like that, can keep up with modern traffic a lot easier. So that is probably my best assessment. I drive them both on a regular basis, and so when I'm driving the 4.5, and after 2, 3, 4 weeks of driving that, I'm itching to get back into 6, and vice versa. I drive the 6 and I'm itching to get back into 4.5. So maybe just buy 2 like I did. But anyway, please hit like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you like what you see. And trust me, I am going to get back onto the welding video of the rocker. It's coming along a treat. I have had a compressor go down, so that slowed things down, and also I had a really bad toothache that I've still got to deal with. So bear with me. I'm a full-time worker as well, so I'm doing all these work and videos in my side time. So appreciate it, guys. Thanks very much, and please comment below if you've got any questions or things you want more clarification on. All right, take it easy. See you in the next one. Cheers.